just talking about race, because what we really wanted to focus on was creating a community where everybody belongs. And so we realized that if you can really accomplish that within the classroom or within the whole school, then if everybody belongs, then everybody belongs, and that's what we want, regardless of differences. We want common humanity to be the underlying glue that brings us all together. So the title of the workshop that we came up with, or Marlene helped me come up with, or I helped her come up with, I can't remember, was How Parents Can Foster and Nurture Habits of Kindness and Inclusion. And I think that word inclusion was a really important one that we wanted to emphasize, as well as kindness, because quite often when we gather together to socialize, there's a natural human tendency that people have to look around like, who do I already know here? And then I know I've found myself doing this on numerous occasions, attach myself to the people I know and possibly ignore the ones I don't, who maybe don't know anybody there in some cases, which isn't very inclusive. But that's something that until we change our habits, that's what tends to naturally happen for most of us. So there's a few subtitles: honoring individuality and instilling value in a diverse community, which boils down to appreciating and celebrating our differences. Navigating and supporting a foundation of social inclusion in children, and with the ultimate goal of fostering in your child a helper of humanity, developing authentic love for others. Now that sounds pretty lofty, but actually it's really a worthy goal for any times at all. But I think we can all agree that for the times that we're living in right now, if we look around and we see how much controversy and division there is within our society, I think we can agree that we want to do everything in our power to help to heal that and bring people back together, so that we can actually work together for a better world. And that was, okay, now I think I need to introduce myself now that I've introduced the workshop. So I discovered Waldorf education way back in 1978, when my first daughter was born, and she is now, well, she was born in 78. So if you do the math, you'll see that she's in her early 40s. And my husband and I started reading about education. And when we started reading about Waldorf education, we had that immediate feeling of recognition of like, oh, this is what we've been looking for like our whole lives. And we actually ended up helping to start a Waldorf school in Fort Bragg, which is just north of Mendocino, with a Bonnie River, who's, I know some of you know, and it was called the Three Rivers School. And my oldest daughter actually attended kindergarten and first grade at the Three Rivers School, but it didn't, in the long run, it didn't make it financially. And so we moved to Santa Cruz, and then later to Applegate, and our children went to Waldorf school, all three of them, through elementary school, and then they went to public high schools. So as some of you know, when you've been in a community like that for a long time, it kind of gets into your blood. And eventually I felt the call to become a teacher. It went from thinking that was something that was way too difficult and lofty to even imagine attaining to actually realizing that it was something I really wanted to do. So I became a Waldorf teacher, and I graduated from Rudolph Steiner College in 1995, I think it was. I taught for a few years at Live Oak Waldorf as a handwork teacher before that. And then I got a job at a new charter school. It was like the first actual Waldorf charter school, I think, in California, was called the Twin Ridges Alternative Charter School. and it later changed its name to Yuba River Charter School. So I was one of the first teachers at that school, a fourth grade teacher. And I taught there for 11 years, graduated in eighth grade class, went back to first grade. But I left actually after sixth grade with my second class to teach in high school for a year, which turned out to be not what I really wanted to do, although I had trained for high school. And then this job at Golden Valley as a curriculum specialist kind of fell into my lap. And I was at Golden Valley for 9 years, working side by side with Debbie Lenny to strengthen the Waldorf foundations of Golden Valley. And my years there were incredibly rewarding. I will always have a place in my heart for Golden Valley. The teachers and the families and the whole community, I just really felt blessed to be there for so many different reasons. So I feel very blessed to be here tonight. Thank you. And so now with that done, that's who I am. I retired in 2016 from Golden Valley, and what I've done since then is enjoyed my garden. I've written some children's books. I don't know. I managed to keep busy, but it's really hard to say what I'm doing. And once in a while, I have a chance to teach a workshop like this. Okay, so before you start listening to me, I'd like you just to take a minute and ask yourself, and you probably already know the answer, but why did you choose Waldorf education? Whether you're a teacher or a parent, which I assume all of you are probably one or the other. Why did you choose Waldorf education? And why did you choose Golden Valley? Maybe would be the same question. I mean, it's not the same, but you could ask it that way too. And I'd like you just to think about that for a minute, and not just, oh, because my child was miserable at the school that he went to before, because that could be the reason. But what were you looking for in a positive sense? And so I'm just going to give you like a minute. And if you wanted to jot something down, but we'll be having a breakout session later, and you might want to share some of your thoughts about this with the people in your group. Okay. So social inclusion, what does it mean? And why does it matter? And I think that each one of you came to this workshop for a reason. If you're a parent, you know, you might be wondering how you can help your child to feel more part of a group, or maybe you are wondering how you can help your child become more accepting of other children, or maybe you just were curious about the title. I don't know, but I, in all of my years of teaching, always felt that building a healthy, inclusive community where everybody wishes and does, where everybody really wants what's best for everybody else, so that there's an atmosphere of mutual support, is perhaps the single most important goal of school. A lot of the things that children learn in school and in the academic realm are things that could probably be more efficiently taught in less time without having so many people in the room. But when you go into a classroom and you become part of a classroom community, you have a unique opportunity as a growing human being to discover things about yourself as you discover things about other people. And so I think that social inclusion is really important part of that, because if children avoid anybody who feels too different, they're missing out on really valuable learning opportunities, not just learning about others, but learning about themselves. And we all have this tendency that I mentioned before to be a little bit tribal. I'm sure you're aware of it in yourself and in your children. We identify with certain kinds of people and other kinds of people not so much. And our reasons are myriad. Sometimes I know for myself, when I meet somebody, I want to know how much they like to read, because that's something I love to do. And if they're not readers, then, well, we can't talk about books. And maybe I'll be wondering about their politics, because if they don't have the same politics as I do, there's a pretty big list of things we probably aren't going to have a lot of fun talking about these days anyway. So, it's really natural to look for people that we have things in common with, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's how friendships are formed. However, if we overemphasize samenesses, then we start to live in a very narrow world, and we're kind of in a little bubble of people just like me. And I think we can look at some of the ways things have played out in the United States in the past 10 years or longer, to see how that isn't always a real healthy thing. So we have this tendency to be tribal and to want to bond with people who are part of our tribe. And I don't actually see that as a bad thing, because when you think about tribes, you think about people who are mutually supportive of each other. At least I do. So the question that comes up for me is not how to eliminate the idea of a tribe or the behavior that happens within a tribe, but how to expand the tribal boundaries to be more inclusive, how to make it into a less narrow definition. And when we do that, we're actually building a community. There's a book that I read many years ago, I think, at least 5 or 10 years ago, by a writer named Parker Palmer. Some of you may be aware of him. He's a Quaker. And he wrote a book about community. And he defines community, and this is his own definition, but I liked his definition, as a group of people who are diverse, and their diversity defines them as a community, not their sameness. So according to Parker Palmer, when a group of people who are different from each other come together and work together on a common project, they create something new. And that's the gift of community. And there's something really amazing that happens when a group of people come together with a problem and they tackle that problem together, and it seems like a problem that they're not going to be able to solve because I see it this way and you see it that way, and we're never ever going to see eye to eye. It's obvious, because it's either this or that. And then you say it's either red or it's blue, but then something new is born and you get purple, and you didn't even know that such a thing existed before. And I think that is the gift of learning to appreciate new people who are maybe different in certain ways. And over time, we will find out that they're not quite as different as we thought they were. But the differences still need to be honored and respected and even enjoyed, I think. There's a universal human need that every child experiences and every human being experiences, which is the need to belong. And even the most introverted, seemingly loner kind of people have that need. So when children come to school and spend, what, 6.5, 7 hours at school, it's really vitally important. I think we can all agree that they feel welcome there and that they feel that they have an opportunity to contribute something of their unique selves to the group, and that they feel seen and appreciated by the other members of the group. And of course, the teacher has a big role to play in creating that reality. And I know that those teachers that are here listening tonight know what I'm talking about. It's not always easy, but it's really important. And it's kind of, teaching a whole, trying to create a community out of a classroom is like it's like being a chef. That's one comparison. You could compare it to taking a lot of diverse ingredients and making a delicious meal out of it. Or you could compare it to taking a lot of musical instruments and creating an orchestra. But in any case, it's the teacher's job is to make decisions about how that's going to happen. But a school like Golden Valley, where the students stay together year after year after year, and the parents also stay together as the parent community, because they're the adults who sort of surround that classroom as a like a support system. There's a unique opportunity there to create a real community out of that classroom. And no matter how hard the teacher works to do that when the children are in school, you as parents can do it too, from the periphery, in a completely different way. And you do that for your own child's development. And you do it for the group, and you do it for the children who are part of that community. But from the point of view of your own child, the habits that your child develops now will serve them for a lifetime. And when they are adults and they go out into the world, if they have good social habits, and what do I mean by good social habits? If they're able to meet the other person with genuine interest, curiosity, and warmth, they will be playing a huge role in making the world a better place. And I know that all of us, when our children first came to us, wanted to see them develop to their very highest potential and wondered what that was going to be. This is a very important part of that. And it's actually how Waldorf education came about. You may know the story and you may not, so I'll just tell it briefly, that after Europe was absolutely devastated by World War I, which very few people saw coming, it just kind of descended upon them like hell. And people were left wondering, how could this happen? And a man named Emil Molt, who owned a cigarette factory, it was the Waldorf Astoria cigarette factory. He was a student of Rudolf Steiner's. He came to Rudolf Steiner and he said, what can we do? How can education create a society where this kind of thing doesn't happen? And Rudolf Steiner always would wait for someone to ask the question. So when Emil Molt asked the question, Rudolf Steiner sat down and came up with Waldorf education. It seems that he came up with it in a pretty short period of time. And he selected a group of adults that he felt were appropriate to be the first teachers, and they were not experienced teachers. And he put them through a brief training, and the first Waldorf school was born for the children whose parents worked in Emil Molt's factory. And it's really quite a remarkable story, but I think the important part of the story that I want to emphasize is that this education was created so that human beings could learn to live together in peaceful cooperation, and there would be no more of these horrifying events such as a world war. And of course, we're not really there yet. But Waldorf schools and the Waldorf school movement since that time has grown, and now they are all over the world. And I don't know how many there are. Maybe somebody here does know that, but I know that there are a lot more than there were back in 1978 when I first heard about Waldorf education, and certainly many, many more than there were in, was it 1924 when the first Waldorf school was born? Maybe it was a little earlier. So that's the goal. The goal is to create a better world for all of us, and that our children can contribute to that. And if that's going to happen, we have to attend to a lot more than just reading, writing, arithmetic, and art skills. You know, we really have to look at social skills, and that is an art, the art of being truly social. And it's one that, as adults, we're still working on mastering it. It's very important. So, as parents, what can you do? You can do so much to support your child's social development and to help your child's classroom become an inclusive, embracing community where a child with a disability, a child who comes from another country, or maybe is one of the only children of color in the classroom, will not feel lonely because of those differences. Or a child who's just a little bit hard to put up with, which is actually a very common difference. And we all know that children are a work in progress, and how are they to learn to become social if they haven't got anyone to be social with? So that is why Marlene and I came up with the idea that we wanted to focus on creating a community culture of kindness and inclusion, with the parents and the teachers ideally working together towards that. So there's just a few basic underlying premises that I want to mention, and then I want to talk about some practical ideas. I just want to say that you can influence your child's habits and way of seeing the world and behavior a great deal. Not that you can dictate those things, but you can definitely influence them. And you do influence them, whether you are trying to or not. That's just what parents do. They communicate values and opinions and habits to their children. They pass them right on. And so you want to do that as consciously as possible. But in order to do that, you have to be able to establish a connection with the child. You can't just lecture. And so I just want to encourage you to listen carefully to your children when they come home after school. Listen to the stories they tell you. Take them seriously. Ask questions if you don't quite understand. And let them know that you're really interested in what they have to say. And they might say things that you don't agree with. In fact, it's pretty likely that they will from time to time. They might even say things that really bother you. I know my daughter reported to me when my granddaughter, who's now 9, when she was in maybe about four, and she was in preschool, she told my daughter that she didn't think that brown babies were cute. And my daughter was horrified. And she called me up, and she just didn't, she was a little bit like, how could I have a child who could say something like this? I said, well, she probably heard it from someone else. I don't know, But I would recommend in a situation like that not to allow your feelings of surprise and upset to like get away with you. because here you have a very young child who's just learning about the world. But you might want to think about what I can do I can share with her what my own perspective on what she said is, but I think it's pretty important that your child doesn't feel ashamed for being honest with you about something like that. Your children, probably everybody knows that there's some child or other in your child's class that for whatever reason your child has a hard time with. So what do you do with that? And that's a really interesting question, because maybe the complaints that your child is bringing about a classmate seem to you to be pretty valid complaints. That particular individual is just really that doesn't behave very well or isn't very nice. And I just want to encourage parents to try to take that child that your child is struggling with and say, well, what can we discover about this person that we like, that we can appreciate? And really help your child to look at people through new eyes, because all of us are holding up mirrors to each other all the time. And each of us is different with all the people in our lives. Different people bring out different things in us. And the same is definitely true of children. So how can we help our child to look at another person, not so much with judgment as with interest, so as to bring out those special qualities that might be hidden away that no one really even has noticed? One of the things that comes up a lot is in Waldorf education is whether it's better to be direct and talk about issues, or to use stories and modeling and use more of an indirect approach. And I can't give you an answer to that. It depends on the situation, depends on the age of the child. I do believe that what's called indirect, and by indirect I mean, am I modeling for my child what I want? Am I a good model for my child? I can't be overstressed how important that is. And using stories to teach rather than lectures. And I absolutely think those are very powerful ways of communicating values and helping to shape a child's worldview. And then there's times when you might just have to be very blunt with them and talk about something, because it's important enough that they need to understand it. And I think that this is particularly true as children get older, that you go from just suggesting ways through storytelling, ways that to see things, and actually talking about things more as the child gets older and more intellectual. So there's no ultimate rule about this, but stories are very powerful, and your stories are the most powerful stories. And your life experience is one of the greatest gifts that you can give to a child, to share your own stories from your own childhood. In fact, I think that it's really vitally important that your children realize that you were a child once too, and that you sometimes came home from school in tears of frustration. And what did you do about it? And how did you manage? And did you make mistakes? Definitely, I think it's so important for you to share your mistakes with your children as well as your triumphs. So there's so much power in storytelling. And storytelling can take a lot of different forms. You don't have to be a master storyteller to tell stories to your children. Actually, we all tell stories to each other all the time, but we just don't think of it that way. And so, as I said, the stories that you tell your children about your own childhood can be extremely powerful. And you can also make stories up that to address situations that they're dealing with. And depending on the age of your child, those stories can be very different in details from the actual situation you're addressing. But when you make up a story, you have to ask yourself, what are the values that are contained within the action of the story, and how do I want to shape it in a certain direction? These are in Waldorf education, those are called pedagogical stories. And teachers use them a lot to help communicate values to the class. And as the children get older, a lot of these stories are actually in the mythologies that they hear, the Norse mythology or the Greek or Indian or Egyptian. There's all kinds of like lessons embedded within these mythologies. And then as they get past 5th grade into 6th, 7th, 8th grade, their history lessons are full of biographies of people who have overcome all kinds of challenges. And these are really inspiring and strengthening to share with children. And your own stories can be that too. I used to tell my students about something that happened. I'll just tell a quick one very quickly from my own 4th grade year, which is that I was a very feisty kind of active and slightly show-offy 4th grader. And there was a boy in the class that had somehow earned the nickname Skinny Dynamo. And I didn't know why they were calling him that, but I thought it was pretty funny. And I noticed that that the kids in my class were teasing him a lot. So I didn't know why, and I didn't ask myself why, but I thought it might be really fun to wrestle with him. And I was sure I could beat him, even though I was the smallest kid in the class. And so I did that. I challenged him to a wrestling match, and he did not want to wrestle me. He was a very quiet, kind of a withdrawn little boy. And I insisted, and I wouldn't leave him alone. So he finally had to wrestle me, and I beat him. I pinned him down. I didn't physically hurt him, but I really humiliated him. And the other students were standing around laughing and cheering for me. And the teacher was there too. And she didn't say a word. And when I had triumphed over Skinny Dynamo, the teacher said, "Oh my goodness, Lee is really a tomboy, isn't she?" And I became like twice as puffed up at that. And this boy, over time, I began to notice that he didn't have any friends, and that actually he was a really deeply unhappy child. And I had contributed to that, and I knew it. So I shared this story with the children in the class. The following year, when I was in 5th grade, I was just a little bit more awake. And I wanted to do something for this boy who I had hurt. He was still being teased. So I sent him, I think, 10 anonymous Valentines, all in different handwriting. That was my way of making it up to him. Now, I'm not telling that. When I told that story to my class, I wasn't trying to make myself out to be any kind of a hero for doing that. Just to let them know that anybody can be unkind. It's just something that happens. It happens when we're not really fully conscious of what we're doing and how it's affecting the other person. And when we wake up to it, we can learn to be kind. So let's wake up and let's not have to make those kinds of, hopefully, mistakes first. But if we do, let's learn from them. So I found that to be like the children in my class, when I was their teacher, had a very hard time imagining their teacher behaving that way. But I think it's important for our children to know that we're all learning, and that we make choices, and we make mistakes, and we can also choose to do something to rectify the mistake. I don't know what he made of all those Valentines. I'm not sure it was a really effective way to make it up to him, but I tried. So, practical suggestions. You can get together with other class parents, and you can actually dream up things to do outside of school that really help to create a sense of community within the classroom. Examples: sometimes you could have activities that are specific to the boys in the class could all go bicycling together with the dads, or the girls could get together and do something. And I realized that boys, girls doesn't always, I mean, not everybody even fits into those two categories, but I'm just sort of throwing out ideas here. One thing, that when I was teaching, I always talked to my parents about was parties, because they can be opportunities for inclusion and they can be opportunities for exclusion. And birthday parties in particular can have a huge impact on a class. So if you are one of those parents who likes to give large birthday parties, and not everybody is, I think, but consider a birthday party that includes the whole class, or if not that, a birthday party that is for a handful of good friends. But the kind of party that I found as a teacher to be really problematical in terms of how it affected the social dynamic in the class was the large birthday party where one or two or three or even four children just didn't get invited because the child whose birthday it was didn't want to invite them. And this can be controversial, and you might not all like me saying this, but I'll say it anyway. It's good to ask yourself, well, what's more important? Supporting an inclusive social climate in my child's class, or letting my child kind of run the show and decide who to not invite? Because that's what it comes down to, is who do I not like well enough to invite to my party? So I like to see parents just come to an agreement. Let's do it like this. And for the child who, and there are certain children who are the ones who don't get invited on a regular basis for whatever reason. And for those children, that's a huge gift, that they are not going to have that experience of being the one who didn't get to go to the party. If you want your child to care about how other people are treated, sometimes your child might need to talk to an adult about what they see. And this is where it's really important to teach the difference between tattling and reporting. And, really basically the difference is when you tattle on somebody, you're trying to get them in trouble. But when you're reporting something that you saw that you're concerned about, you're probably trying to help somebody not get into trouble, or to ask the adult to step in and address the trouble that's already happened. So it can be kind of a subtle difference, but I think it's an important one, because children don't really understand that. And the tattletale rule that, we don't like anybody who tattletales, can create an environment where all kinds of hurtful things are happening in secret within the classroom or in the neighborhood. This is so important, that you model what you want to teach your children. What does that mean? What comes up for me is be really aware of how you speak about other people. How am I speaking about other people in front of my children? And I don't just mean people that they know. How do you speak about people that you strongly disapprove of in front of your children? I think that today, you know, we're living in an environment where we're saying really negative things about other people is pretty commonplace in the media, certainly on social media, but even on the news. You just see it at every turn. And so what can we do about that, right? We can't stop that from happening, but we can show our children that this is the way we do it in our family. And it can take quite a bit of self-discipline to actually do that, to actually be aware of our speaking habits. But the great thing about that is that not only is this help your child to develop good social habits, but it's also helping you. And the more we focus on what's positive in other people, the more we're going to see of it. And that's something you can explicitly teach your children. So there is a tool I just want to share with you that you may be familiar with, I don't know. And that is the Virtues Project. Actually, where did I put my cards? Oh, there they are. So the Virtues Project, I don't know, is Golden Valley still using the Virtues Project? Probably to some extent, but I don't know how much parents know about it. I have a resource sheet that Amala is going to let you see, that you can write it down. But anyway, the Virtues Project offers tools for bringing out the best in your children. And one of the tools that I used when I was a teacher that I really enjoyed were the Virtues cards. And you can just pull a card, and there are Virtues cards for families, Virtues cards for educators, for school children, and then there are cards for adults. And I'll just give an example. I have these Virtues cards for adults here, and I just put a bunch of them together, and you can just pull a card and you can read what it says, and then you can reflect on it. So I have the card here. It says compassion. Compassion is deep empathy for another who is suffering or living with misfortune. It's understanding and caring and a strong desire to ease their distress. Compassion flows freely from our hearts when we let go of judgments and seek to understand. Our compassionate presence helps people to know they are not alone. Sometimes they don't need us to fix anything. They only need to be heard with compassion so they can connect to their own inner wisdom. We need our own compassion as much as others do. Whether a silent prayer or a gentle touch, compassion is a priceless gift. And on the other side, we have a quote. And this is a quote from the Dalai Lama. He says, "If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion." And these are cards for adults that I'm reading from because they happen to be the only ones I have. But if you have family cards, the language is simpler. The concepts there's fewer cards, fewer virtues. But if you as a family actually have, if a child comes home with a problem, this is an example of how you could use these cards. And your child is upset, you can say, well, let's take a virtues card and see what it has to tell us. And you can use that card for the basis for helping the child to work through the situation. I'm going to have you break out into smaller groups for about 20 minutes. We'll give you 20 minutes to talk to each other. And then when you come back, I'd like to have a question and answer session for about another 20 minutes. So what are you going to talk about on your breakout? I'm going to give you some ideas, but I'm going to let you decide as a group. So you could just share your thoughts about inclusion and ask yourselves, why do you think it's important? What kind of things do you notice in your own child? What role does your child have in their class? one, I think, really good question to ask is how much parental involvement is the right amount? I think that's a really important question. At what point do you step in and really help children to solve their social problems? And when do you step back and trust that they can do it for themselves? And there's no answer to that, but it's worth reflecting on. Every situation is unique. How do your own childhood memories affect what you are passing on to your children? What do you remember from your own childhood? And are there specific stories or memories that you think would be interesting to share with your children that you haven't shared, or that you would like to share with the group? And you can, how concerned are you about issues of race and bias in the culture at large, and also at the school where your child is attending, Golden Valley? And and what level of concern do you have about bullying and teasing issues and inclusion issues? So those are just some ideas. Just talk about your own experience and your own thoughts on the subject, and we will be back in 20 minutes.